And Dean, I can always put it up on YouTube then once I figure out how to sign back in.
That sounds like a good plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, of course. And I will have to figure out how to reset all of these fun things. But anyway, all right. So as I said, we're going to start. I'll just introduce the topic. I will throw it to each of you to introduce yourselves. And then we'll just start talking about what are our definitions and how we think about cancel culture and kind of go from there. So I take more of a moderator role and I try to get everyone in to provide their perspectives as much as they wish to provide their perspectives. And Addie, are you okay with Dean live tweeting?
Yes, of course, no problem.
Awesome.
Good, thank you.
Yes, and thank you all for being here today at the end of 2023. And here's to hoping all of your 2020 or end of 2022. Got ahead of myself. Here's to hoping your 2023s are good. But thank you everyone for coming in today for our popular culture dialogue from the Popular Culture Studies Journal. Today we have an interesting topic that has grown in importance, I would say, over the past 5 years, and it is the term cancel culture. And we're going to be talking with our panelists today about how that idea of cancel culture and the phenomenon itself really has an impact on popular culture, so that we as scholars can be thinking about the production and the reception of these texts. And by texts, I also mean the people who make them, the brands. So we're going to do like we always do and throw to each person to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with the individuals who are newer to the panel. We're going to start with Elyan.
Hi, well, first, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. So I've completed a master at the Université de Paris Cité in 2021, and it was on the topic of transmasculine representation in fandom and popular culture, with a case study of the character of Spider-Man, specifically the incarnation from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And right now I'm preparing a teaching exam in France, and at the same time working on Ph.D. application. And I hope to continue studying representation of transmasculinity in popular culture, and specifically the superhero genre, which is like a bit of everywhere at the moment.
Wonderful. All right. Glad to have you here, and I wish you good luck on the PhD applications. Let's go down to the person who's below me on my screen, to Addie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, especially Dean, who suggested I join. I'm currently a researcher at a private institute named Key Impact, for which I research public policy and gender. And I also work for Tel Aviv University, especially with identity politics, political philosophy, and political communication. I generally work with public education of youth. So I'm at the Department for Youth Education at the university. And my master's thesis was on the history of identity politics, especially focusing on multi-sexual identities.
You definitely sound like you have a lot of great background to bring to this topic, so I'm glad Dean was able to convince you to come on board today.
Thank you.
Great. You're welcome. Let's go over to Debbie.
I'm Debbie Seacrest. I'm a math professor, and I also teach music in Montana, so a small rural school. And I'm here as really more of a consumer and an advocate. In, again, our small town, I find myself especially advocating for LGBTQ plus people, fat activism, disability rights, accessibility, and doing everything I can to get us closer and closer to some semblance of accessibility for everybody.
When you say small Montana town, how small are we talking, just for those unfamiliar with Montana?
Depends, is school in session or not?
Oh, okay.
About 4,000.
That is small. That's about the size of my university. So yeah, that is definitely small.
Yeah, and we have about 1,400 at our university, some of whom stay here over the summers and some don't, although we get a lot of tourists coming to fish and so on, so it almost makes up for it.
All right. Well, thank you, Debbie, for being here for more of the advocate perspective. And we'll go then to
Thank you.
Princess.
Hi, I'm Princess. I'm from St. Lucia, an island in the Caribbean. And I think I'm just going to put it out there. I don't believe in such a term of cancel culture. That's how I'm going to start off. I have degrees in literature and history and religion, and I have my research interests are in gender and violence and pop culture, and of course how it interacts with religion and history and the other texts. So, and I'm a strong advocate for the LGBTQ community, women, and Black and other people of color.
Definitely going to get into I don't believe it's a thing, but first, before we get into the I don't believe it's a thing, does anyone want to provide kind of like a general definition? So like when we are talking about cancel culture, what seems to be the generally accepted idea that we're talking about?
I think the way I understand it, or the way I feel it's used mostly, is cancel culture is this idea of basically the action of canceling someone. That means excluding them, rejecting them because they did something that is judged not acceptable, basically. And that usually means canceling means rejecting them and whatever work they have created, and also limiting their access to an audience.
Addie, would you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it has a public side to it. So I would say it's the practice of holding a public figure or cultural figure or an institution accountable for problematic behavior through boycotting their products or services, or rejecting their presence in the public sphere.
No, it's interesting because that sounds like maybe a good definition for what we mean by canceling. What does it mean though when we add the culture to it? Because that's kind of where it becomes even more contentious, at least the way that I've seen it. So we have this idea of canceling, as you both were discussing, that idea of rejecting someone, boycotting someone, taking actions to in some way correct maybe, or silence. There's a lot of different variations there too, of someone who did something or recently or in the past that was deemed inappropriate and perhaps has not demonstrated any contrition or any regret or any learning from that. But what does it mean when we add the culture to it, Debbie?
I feel like the idea of cancel culture is that there is a group, whatever that means, that wants to cancel certain, especially media, businesses, and so on, because of their actions. And I, in my experience, cancel culture has usually been used as essentially an insult in terms of these people can't take a joke and so on, and therefore want to cancel and limit people who might want to really take those problematic trends, movies, TV shows, businesses further. And I think cancel culture is definitely very much focused only on the other side, whatever that means, in terms of those people want to cancel these good things and just kind of grouping everybody, which I think not seeing people as individuals, not looking at cases as being individual cases can be really problematic.
Before I move on, because I definitely want to let Princess give why she thinks it's not a thing. Elyan and Addie, anything you want to add based on what Debbie just said?
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead.
Sure. I think I agree with Debbie that it was coined by people who object to the practice of canceling. But I want to argue that since these are the people who reclaimed slut and queer and other originally derogatory terms, I see now that some groups or societies actually take cancel culture as saying, yes, we are the people who do this, and we do this because we want to hold people accountable in the societal rules of our specific community. So I think I agree that it was originally derogatory, but I think it was somewhat reclaimed.
Interesting. I mean, just before Elyan, I'll let you jump in, but Addie, what you were just saying makes me think also about the use of social justice warrior and SJW and how there was work to reclaim that as well from a similar perspective. Elyan?
Yeah, I think I mostly agree or I kind of see what you're was talking about, but I feel like it's difficult to talk about cancel culture as like one thing, because I feel like there's different, like several cancel cultures, like plural. Because on the one hand, there's to make it like really as simple as possible, like binary as possible, there would be like one cancel culture which is actually holding people who do harmful things, say harmful things accountable, especially like people who are in position of power, and like taking away our support or attention, taking away their access to us as an audience when they do not hold themselves accountable. And then there's the other cancel culture, which would be the kind of the opposite, which is when people who are usually not in position of power, mostly people who are minorities, part of different minorities, do something that can be that deserves some criticism, and for which they should be held accountable, are held accountable at a much higher scale and face a lot harsher consequences than the other situation, which is people who are actually in position of power. And then in this case, cancel culture, this type of cancel culture becomes a weapon to take away resources away from those people who do not have the same sort of impact, like the actions don't have the same sort of impact. So it's like the scale, I'd say the intent of canceling and the scale of the consequences of this canceling are very different. And I think are brought on by different type of people with different instances. One would be actually holding people accountable for the harmful things that they do, and the other would be using the language of cancel culture, the language of social justice, and to control or to hurt people who are not in a position to really fight back. So I'm thinking mostly about like independent content creators, so people who are not corporation or not like huge celebrities, but think about singers, YouTubers, or like older actors, artists, writers don't necessarily have the same reach as, let's say, Disney, and and using cancel culture, and especially the how difficult it is to actually, work on yourself and use the criticism that you have received and have a space to which, grow and evolve and apologize. And, there's not giving any second chances to these smaller creators as a way to, oppress them. So that's stuff like, like all the men's rights activists, for example, who would go harass female writer for a comic book series, or like an actress of color in in their favorite movies, and dig up stuff that they might have said in the past or done, or anything that can be that deserves criticism, but using this as a tool to actually harm them and not actually, try to make the world a safer, better place.
So in a sense, it's almost like on the one hand, you have perhaps the goal more towards social justice and having conversations and helping people perhaps with the self-reflection necessary for personal growth. But on the other hand, it starts to align more with trolling, with silencing, and with trying to maintain certain power dynamics, especially white patriarchal Christian power dynamics. Okay. Princess, I'm going to throw it to you. What do you think on this, about this term?
I think that it was a term created by the dominant groups, or groups, to silence marginalized and minority groups. Hence why I don't believe in cancel culture. I think every time a majority group, whether they be white, Christian, straight, does something offensive, and a person of color or somebody who's a member of the LGBTQ or who's not Christian corrects them and tells them this is not cool, they say we're throwing a fit and call it we're canceling. And now to Elyan's point about how it might go the other way, like if a Hispanic says something offensive about a Black person, how they will suffer worse consequences than a white person. Here's my thing: the Hispanics should know better. They know better. They know better. Hence why sometimes the consequences is harsher, because you know better. You are a minority group. You have also suffered racism. You sometimes Hispanics and Black people live in the same neighborhood, so they've seen the racism and the discrimination. They've probably seen Black people get shot. They've probably seen Black people be followed in the stores. So when they make comments about, they make a racial comment or a stereotype comment about a Black person, yes, a lot of Black people are going to treat them harsher because they know better.
But shouldn't we also say that of just like anyone at this day and age with the globalized information network that we have at our fingertips? If you're just continuing to espouse, dangerous stereotypes and harmful rhetoric, like I'm still amazed at seeing people, and I was just up in northeastern Wisconsin visiting some family, the amount of people still flying the Blue Lives Matter flag. With maybe they don't understand what that means, but it's given how far into all of this we are. Either you are so immensely ignorant, or you understand what it means and you still endorse it. And it's hard then to understand, like, how do we approach that? Is it just you cancel your neighbors and your family members and whatnot who are still engaging in these types of things? Or do we have a conversation with them? And it might be easier when it's neighbors or family members or friends, but when it's complete strangers online, then it can be hard as well, even harder.
I don't think it's the job of the minority group or minority groups to have conversations with the dominant group. I mean, we're in a day and age that, like you said, it's global. The internet's there. You can research. We don't have to do the work. We don't need to have conversations with you. We've been trying to have conversations with you for decades, centuries. And now that so-called cancel culture is in place, you want to say, oh, let's have a conversation. But Black people, Jews, Muslims, gay people have been trying to have conversations with the majority group or groups for years. So it's not our job. If you want to change your ways, the internet is there. Google, I could give you a list of reading books to read, or list of scholars or people who are experts in racial reconciliation, or the LGBT community. I could give you their YouTube videos.
I think for me, like I do agree that most of the time it's not the place of the minority to educate, or at least it shouldn't be our responsibility. It should always be a choice that you actually want to do that at that moment with this person. And I think with the cancel culture, the thing that I see missing from in the way I've seen the term used is the context. Like I would prefer talking about canceling as like an act that's like you know, it's the act of canceling and not cancel culture, because what for me the impact, the consequences of the way I see everything depends on the context. So depending on who's doing the canceling, who's being canceled, what for, when, in what language, what context. So for example, so I'm French, I'm in France, and in terms of like the vocabulary of, I would say, like social justice and oppression and everything that allows us to have like really complex conversation about intersectionality and everything. All these words, most of these words do not really exist in France, or are not really common yet. They're mostly restricted to small academic circles that took them from English. And so, for example, if I had to cancel someone French who's using a word that's like in English that they shouldn't be using because it's not there to reclaim, for example, the way I would approach this would be different than if it was an English speaker. Because if it's an English speaker, I would assume that, okay, they've heard this word, they know this word. But if it's a French speaker, then I wouldn't approach it the same way. And paradoxically, I see like French media love taking English words, this type of English words, and then kind of like putting their own meaning and their own spin on them to create their whole, like use it at their advantage. So you can see in like French talk show people talking about cancel culture, but like it means whatever they want it to mean. Like the new favorite term is woke, that you see everywhere in French media, and so it's basically any sort of like leftist intersectional approach of like that wants equality for all minorities, and anyone who try to fight against sexism, racism, and all that are woke, and it's used in a very like it's meant to be an insult. It's meant to ridicule, and it means whatever they want it to mean at that time. There's no, and since most French people don't have the context of like where the word, where that expression comes from and everything, if I see someone French who use that word in this kind of insulting way, I wouldn't approach them the same way. And same for like a content creator who like maybe drew something that was a kind of bad stereotype years ago. I wouldn't approach it the same way as if they drew it like yesterday, or if it was once versus it was like 10 times over the years. There's, I think, context to canceling is something that's often missing in the conversation, and that allows troll to like harm, like bully the people they want to bully or to harass, because the context is taken away. And so that's why I think a lot of time the consequences are disproportionate to the action. And by that, I mean either people suffering really harsh consequences for something that didn't really deserve it, that was like basically a human mistake that could be understood in the context of their lives and the information they had access to, versus someone, for example, who's very famous, who's has a large audience and has years and years of like actual like professional critiquing their work, many interviews, many exchanges, participate to conferences and all that kind of stuff, and who has done something harmful, keeps doing something harmful, and basically nothing happens to them. They still have access to most of the audience. They still continue to get work. They still continue to get money, and a lot of people will continue to excuse whatever they're doing because they just don't want to stop consuming the product that they are producing, basically. So I think, I mean, there's unfortunately, many celebrities I think who fit into that. For me, the most obvious one for me is J.K. Rowling, and since I'm like focused on like trans identity and stuff, I've followed everything that she's been doing and saying for the past few years, and like she's complained about canceling and tough transsexual radical feminists complain constantly about canceling, but they haven't actually lost access to anything. They still have an audience, they still have money, they still like whatever they're creating is still being consumed, compared to some trans creator who, if they do one mistake, they will lose access to everything that they had immediately. There will be no space for redemption, when the famous one doesn't even have to change anything. Okay, sorry, I've been
It's okay, Debbie.
One thing that I have found is when I've asked my students to use proper pronouns for myself and for others, they seem to think that I am sort of canceling their views, their right to only use the pronouns that they want to use for me. And they seem to take that as taking away their freedom of speech. And I have never actually done this, but my child's fourth grade teacher refuses to use their pronouns because she's not allowed to talk about pronouns. So I really want to tell them that they should use the wrong pronouns for the teacher and see how he likes it. That's probably not a good idea. But I have found that just talking with my students, and again, it is not my responsibility to educate, advocate, etc. But that's something that I personally choose to do. I recently got an anonymous course evaluation that said Debbie is a kind person, although I don't agree with some of her views, and they had scratched out her and put there. She is, and they scratched out she is and put they are kind to, and so on. And the fact that, they initially wanted to use she, her pronouns for me, and then realized as they were writing, I mean, they only had 5 or 10 minutes on this. Wait a second, I should be respectful and I should use the pronouns that they want me to use. And just seeing that change from you're trying to cancel my right to use whatever pronouns I want to, well, maybe I should kind of be open to, I guess, looking at a wider point of view than just the one thing that, I remember my second grade teacher, you can't use they as a singular pronoun. It's like maybe we can move past that.
Princess?
I think also the reason why some of the executives and the famous writers like J.K. Rowling and actors who, when they do something, they don't suffer as much as people who don't have the audience that they do. There are people who actually think like that. And for every million people who hate what J.K. Rowling is saying about trans people, there are 1.5 million more people. So they're going to, so she's going to get money. So even if the people who are affected by her comments decide to have a conversation to change her mind, and there are people who have tried that and who decide to broaden their views and not cancel her, and or even they decide to just cancel her completely, she's still going to make money because there's that 1.5 million people who agree with her. So when you're dealing with actors and famous people and corporations that have more money, more potential, is also the idea of capital class also comes into the situation, because as much as how hard you try to take away punish them or not punish them, there are people who are going to agree with them and pay for their content.
Yeah, I'd say I think the majority isn't even, it's not that they agree with them, it's that they just don't care. Like for what's cancelable, like offense for some people will be for some other like something to celebrate. And I think for a lot of people it will be something that just it just doesn't really matter. It just doesn't, they don't really take it into account. So I mean, with J.K. Rowling, it's clear like TERF are not the majority, but the majority of like Harry Potter fans, just like their love for Harry Potter or their interest for Harry Potter content is more important. It matters to them more than the rights of trans people or how trans people are treated. So it's something that they're able to just push aside, and they don't feel the need to cancel J.K. Rowling or like boycott her like new video game that's going to be coming out next year or anything, because that's, and I think like J.K. Rowling is the perfect example of like how like cancel culture when it comes to pop culture doesn't really mean anything specific, because like J.K. Rowling has been, she's still omnipresent in like the pop culture landscape. With Harry Potter is still everywhere, and there's not really anything that has had an actual impact on the place of Harry Potter in the global cultural landscape. And it really shows that for some people, the popular culture that they like is more important to them than the possible offenses that someone might do, and that would require canceling.
Debbie, I'm going to throw to you, but then I also want to throw to Addie to let her add on to this if she wishes. So Debbie?
So I was thinking about the fact that in many ways, I think it's kind of a spectrum. I certainly went from that second grade, you can't use they for a single person, to, you probably shouldn't, to, well, maybe you could, to, and to using it myself. And I think in a lot of ways, people mainstream, whatever you want to call it, wait until it gets to a certain point at which, for example, maybe when it starts affecting, finances. I'm reminded of the ride at Disneyland Splash Mountain, which was based on a very racist movie from the 50s, I think. And, I know that people had been talking about it being inappropriate for I don't know how many years, and they finally, I believe, changed it a couple years ago. Um, and I obviously don't know many of the details, but that, kind of wave of this really is not appropriate until finally there's so much that they say, oh yeah, we should probably fix this. So kind of at what point does that wave catch up to them enough that they actually make the changes that they should make?
Addie, would you like to add?
Yeah, I very much agree with Debbie that these processes of like educating the public sphere take a long time. And I also agree with Princess that it is not the responsibility of anyone who is oppressed or underprivileged to explain to other people. But I do think that privilege actually does make you responsible. So if I'm trade passing or white passing, or like I have a combination, I think, of privileged and non-privileged identities. As such, I have the ability to educate. It's not a duty, but it is something that I'm able to do. And I think the thing with cancel culture, that the term is a way of discouraging people who has the will or the opportunity to use some power, either economic power or their voice in social media or in traditional media. And you don't have to use that power. If you're a trans person and you want to read Harry Potter, then by all means, that is your right. But if I'm an ally to trans people and people listen to me and I can educate people on what Rowling is doing to my trans ally, to my community who includes trans people, then this is my responsibility. So I think the way to fight the derogatory elements of cancel culture and saying proudly, I am canceling, is actually using my privileges to say, I want to educate you on what you're doing to identities I either identify with or support. So it's not the responsibility of those hurt. It's the responsibility of those who are able and can and have resources that they can use, whether these resources are followers on Twitter or they're just the money in their purses.
I do like the fact that you brought up Twitter, because we have seen with the acquisition of it by Elon Musk, there's more of an attempt to right the wrongs as perceived by the white straight male that is Elon Musk, and to try to address cancel culture from the perspective of giving people the platform in which to, air grievances, air very real grievances. And it does bring up the question of, well, what is going to happen with these social media platforms if we continue to see them controlled in that way? I know that I hopefully have been acting as an ally, but I had to get off Twitter because I can't support what Musk does. And before that, I had to get off of Facebook because I can't support what Zuckerberg does. And I'm limited now to basically TikTok, and there's not really, I'm not sure how much longer that's going to go. So it almost feels like we have this power to potentially address a lot of these wrongs, but we're having this two-prong attack, both rhetorically by the labeling of cancel culture and labeling woke and social justice warrior and all these things as a negative to try to degrade that collective consciousness and collective activity. But then you also have those in power who wish to remain in power and wish to remain traditional power structures, buying up the channels that we've used to organize. And it might be harder moving forward for this type of work to occur. I don't know, that was just a thought that came to my head at this point.
Yeah,
Yes,
Sorry.
yes, I noticed that when I'm calling him, he shall not be named, also acquired Twitter, a lot of the people that were banned coming back on Twitter, and a lot of the people who have left are people in power. We're not people in power, people who have privilege, while while marginal groups are still staying, because before he shall not be named acquired Twitter, that is where we built our communities. So I do understand why a lot of the privileged people are leaving, but I feel like, okay, so you are just going to leave us there in the wilderness while he shall be not named and all his trolls and minions do what they do.
That's a good point. It makes me feel like I should get back on it and get back to fighting, even if it means Musk gets more money.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Princess. Like, I'm on Twitter, I'm mostly in like artist community, so like illustrator, comic artists, and these kind of people. And Twitter for the past few years has become like the main like professional platform where people find work. And so when Musk like got Twitter, the discussion for many artists was, well, I wish I could leave, but I can't, because this is where I find jobs. This is where I can, share my work and it actually reach people who can pay me to do it. And this is where my community and my resources as an artist are. So most people, myself included, most of these artists are just like waiting and hoping that Twitter remains functional enough that we can still use this platform and we don't really have to rebuild from nothing on another platform. And that also impacts especially people who draw like sexual content and any other type of sex worker online. Twitter is basically the last social media platform that allows for some form of explicit, like actually explicit content. And so this sex workers or they don't really have another place to go that has the same reach as Twitter has in terms of like the way your content can be like reach many people. Most of the other platforms that are available are like Patreon, for example, are more like blogs or stuff. It doesn't really have the same flow that social media has. So this is, I think, this really shows like for me, the impact of canceling, how it can be different for people who are more privileged versus people who are not. Because like a smaller artist who lose the access to their Twitter account, for example, because they got cancelled, whether it was for right or wrong reason, and they get harassed and their Twitter account gets like blocked for one reason or another. If they have to rebuild, even if they actually get like accepted back into the community, or their cancellation is cancelled, if they have to rebuild from the beginning, it will be a lot harder for them than for someone with more privilege, who actually, if they decide to leave a platform themselves, it would be a lot easier for them to just come back. And that's from like famous people celebrities, but I think even for that's something I've seen with smaller like content creators who like between even between a white trans person and a trans person of color, it didn't really have the same impact on them when they got some criticism. But the white person caused a lot more leeway, I think, to the person of color, even though they both did things that were really harmful to other communities, and they both deserve some criticism, but the way it happened was different, and the way they were able to come back was also different. And that's like I think like that's on a small scale, but I think if we start talking on bigger, even on bigger scale, there's the same thing. Like recently, I think I saw someone criticizing Glass Onion, the Ryan Johnson movie that just came out, which is very much anti-billionaire, and almost kind of very clearly like tech billionaires. And someone was saying, how is there like how hypocritical of Ryan Johnson, who's quite wealthy, to like pretend to criticize other rich people when he's rich, and someone else replied saying that the scale, like between the difference of wealth between like Ryan Johnson and Elon Musk is much larger than the difference of wealth between Ryan Johnson and you, like even for a middle class comfortable individual, and like taking a movie that has quite a strong, I think, relevant message at the moment with the current events on Twitter and all, and like being very harsh in its criticism of this movie, and the message that it almost feel like a bad faith criticism, like what it's saying doesn't really matter because the person who created it is in a position of privilege.
Before I throw to Princess and then Debbie, Addie, I know you indicated you wanted to say something to my last question, so I want to give you a chance before I throw to Princess.
No, but it's okay. Move on to Princess.
Princess.
As Elyan was talking about the discrepancy between those who can leave and those who can't, I was thinking about the Twitter boost. I remember when Musk was trying to, I don't know if people still have to pay for it, but when Musk was going to, he said that people are going to pay for Twitter, pay for $20 for Twitter Blue. Stephen King, the famous privileged white guy, he is a good ally, but still, said that he will leave if he had to pay for it. And then Musk said, well, would you stay for 8 or 7? I can't remember the amount, I can't remember the exact thing, but it just shows that how people like Stephen King, even though he's an ally, that he still is on Twitter, that they have the opportunity to leave. He can leave, but Black, Latino, Asian, and other minority writers don't have that same thing. And even if Twitter Blue was $20, might not seem anything for Stephen King, but there are a lot of content creators who need that Twitter Blue so that they can grow their content, or they can grow their readership, and they don't have that $20 to spend.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of it has to do with class and money and capital when we're talking about cancel culture and privilege.
And It's similar to like when Donald Trump won the presidency back in 2016, there were a lot of discussions about leaving the country and whatnot. And only really the people who have the resources to do so could do so. And it's then leaves all the people who need a lot more help or who need the help of those people leaving. And yeah, it's interestingly similar perhaps. Debbie?
Building off of that, I think it would be interesting if Stephen King had said essentially, if you do this, I'm going to leave because it's unfair, but I'm also going to pay for, 100 other people who can't afford it to continue on Twitter Blue. That might be one way that he could have helped out while, sticking to his principles and maybe kind of going forward further with those. But I kind of wanted to tie back to something that was said a while back, and I'm not really sure, where to go with this or if this is too far off topic, but someone was talking about, how maybe it was J.K. Rowling, how someone hadn't even apologized. And I'm kind of wondering, what does an apology mean in terms of how we feel about uncanceling them, if you will. I'm reminded my kids were watching the movie Planes, and at one point near the beginning, some of the male planes are racing, and someone else says, "Try to keep up, ladies," to these male planes and we had a conversation about that. Why do you think they said that? And so on. So there are a number of ways to use inappropriate things, and maybe those people apologized and that can be used as a lesson. But kind of when are we, and I don't want to say obligated, but when perhaps would we might want to uncancel things because of an apology or because of change versus not?
Well, it's interesting because I think of one of the biggest examples of maybe the uncanceling is James Gunn. And what happened with James Gunn getting essentially canceled and booted off of Guardians of the Galaxy, then going and making the Suicide Squad and becoming so popular with Warner Brothers that yes, he came back to finish the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy or whatever it's going to be. But now he's essentially in charge of Warner Brothers. But now he also fired Henry Cavill, and there are people who want to cancel him for that. So James Gunn is someone who was uncanceled, but perhaps is now facing some type of canceling again. Princess?
I think it will depend on what was said and how the offended community feels about in general, because not every member of the community might have the same feelings, but in general, the overall general how may feel about how this person will be uncancelled, and it will. What are they willing to do to make it? I'm sorry doesn't cut it. I'll give you an example. The Dutch government, the Netherlands, last week or week before, they apologized to their former colonies, the people, the descendants of the former enslaved people in their former colonies about slavery. But it was just, I'm sorry, but no action with the I'm sorry. So if the Dutch government was cancelled, should they be uncancelled for just simply saying, I'm sorry?
I'm going to go to Addie because we haven't heard from her in a little bit, and then we'll go to Elyan.
What I wanted to say is I think we should have some guidelines. I mean, an apology like Louis C.K. is something that I think is not enough to come back from. And Princess's guideline for look at the offended community to see what they're saying. I also think that it's different when we're talking about ensembles and personal creations, because if one thing that my daughters had said to me about Harry Potter is that we really love the translator to Hebrew, and we like Emma Stone in the movie. So we know what you think of Rowling, but can we also think of the other people? And they friends had said that also about Joss Whedon's creations, and I think we can think of viewing things critically or reading things critically more when it's either that person, the person we wanted to cancel had passed away or apologized in a meaningful way that convinces the community, or if that's an ensemble work and we're not giving our money straight to the hands of someone who's offended our community or a community that we care about, but and we want to fend for. But we should use the creations that are ensemble works to be critical, but also not complete cancel. I'm a huge advocate of non-binary cultural behaviors. So not a complete cancel and not non-cancel at all, but consume it critically.
And I think H.P. Lovecraft is a good example of what you were just talking about, Addie, given how much people still love the idea and the mythos of Cthulhu, but they have huge issues with Lovecraft and even the way he wrote some of his things. Elyan?
Yeah, I think what you said about Henry Cavill, about Justice League movies, made me think of what happened very recently with him again, and with The Witcher. And I think it's a good example of like cancel culture doesn't really mean anything, in that there was the announcement that he was going to be replaced in the Witcher series, and immediately fans were, because Cavill is known to be like a huge fan of the novel, and there was in some interview he talked about trying to have some input into the characters that he was playing, so that it'd be more like the novel, and like imply that this sort of input was rejected. And as the show has been criticized for going really far from the novel, a lot of fans were like supporting him. And so when the news came that he was going to be replaced, I think what I saw, the assumption was that it was because of a creative disagreement, and probably because he wanted things to be more like the novel, and the show creators, the powers that be, wanted to go their way, and that's why it was fired. So people were ready to cancel The Witcher. And then came out the information that actually he was being a horrible person on set, was harassing co-workers, crew members, behaving terribly, especially with the women on set, and just creating a dangerous work environment. And that there has been several warnings, several interventions asking him to change his attitude and all that, and not do anything. And so they came to the point that they had to fire him. And now The Witcher is back in good graces, and Cavill is the one being cancelled. And I think on a much larger scale, I think the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial is a good example of this: who's being cancelled and when and for what, and this constant back and forth. First it was Johnny Depp years and years ago, then suddenly some info came that actually she was the one being abused. No, she was the one being cancelled. Johnny Depp was back. And then there was more influences, and then during the trial, you basically like have two sides that are cancelling each other, because you still have a lot of people who think Amber Heard is like the abuser and you are cancelling her, and then people who think, okay, Johnny Depp is the one who deserves to be cancelled. And I think in a situation of quite privileged people, we can also see here the difference of like consequences and the form of cancelling, because those are like famous, wealthy, thin, white people. And Amber Heard, I think she's bisexual, women has suffered much harsher consequences if you look at her career, especially compared to death in terms of canceling. So I think it's also a good example of that.
And I think this is pointing out the fact that we need to have another conversation looking just at the consequences, especially that idea of the knee-jerk back and forth and how quickly the target of the canceling can change. But we are at time, so I want to, wrap things up and maybe just a word from each of you in terms of maybe what you think 2023 will hold when it comes to cancel.
Can I just say a small thing before that?
Sure.
Sorry to barge in. I think it's really important, especially in the context of Johnny Depp and everything that happened there. It's off topic, but the notion that abuse can be mutual versus the notion that abuse is systemic is really important. Like, abuse is based in a system of abuse. Otherwise, it can be bad, but it's not abuse. Thank you.
Addie, I know you have to run off, so I'm going to give you the first chance at closing remarks.
So looking at 2023, I'm not optimistic specifically. In the long run, I think we're winning. We had, and when I say we, I mean like the people who reclaim social justice, not as something offensive, but as something they claim to themselves. And I think in the long run, we're winning. We had, where I'm from, we had this horrible expressions of misogyny and racism in the past week with the awful government that was appointed. And I've noticed that one of the person who said something awful, really, like she wanted to let doctors not treat people at their own discretion. And that was horrible. But when she said that, she said, a male doctor or a female doctor, because Hebrew makes you choose genders. So she said a male doctor or a female doctor, and not just the word for a male doctor, which is how it used to be common to be said in Hebrew. And also she ended the awful sentence of a doctor can hold treatment if there is treatment available to the person right there and then. And it seems to me that she's saying something really awful and dangerous to Israeli minorities, to LGBT people, to women. But at the same time, she is showing that she has accepted the idea that she cannot just publicly deny this service. She can protect the little community of awful conservative ideas that she lives in, but they know they've already lost. And I think 2023 is going to be a backlash year. And I think like reinstating people that were blocked from Twitter is an example of a backlash. So I think, yeah, we're having, this year is going to be backlashy in a horrible way. But I think that in the long run, we're winning. And with like a broad historic perspective, which is part of my academic work, I see that times of moral panic do bring this backlash, but also to progress. But I think so in the long run, progress is winning, and cancel culture is a way of imposing social ideas that are good. And promoting them with good non-violent ways. But unfortunately, power had not completely shifted. It's shifting. Since it's not shifted, then there is a backlash. So like in the near future, cancel culture, both as reclaimed and a derogatory term, are both here to stay. Thank you.
Princess, Debbie, Elyan, you want to add anything to that or offer your own ideas as to what might be coming in the next year?
I'm not very optimistic. I feel like people are going to be racist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, whatever, and all the isms and phobics. And when oppressed people cancel or call them out, they're going to put in that, oh, we're being snowflakes, or here comes cancel culture again. And nothing is going to, I'm not positive, optimistic about anything changing.
Debbie?
I think for me, it's kind of a question of who is changing. And it makes me think, back to that evaluation that I got where, I didn't reach the person who, initially told me, pronouns are, they don't even seem to know what pronouns are, but I did reach someone who, thought I was wrong and maybe still thinks I'm wrong, but at least is willing to acknowledge and respect who I am. So I'm not, expecting everybody to make progress. You'd think at least some people would make some progress, but I am hopeful that some of those people who are, kind of on their way toward understanding, acceptance, etc., might be able to make it a little bit further.
And Elyan?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much of the same idea of the Debbie on like a lot of people being on their way. At least like in term, that's what I think I've kind of already noticed in media, and I think a lot of like popular media is kind of reflective of what's happening in society in general, in people in general, is like they are on their way. So they're not necessarily like very progressive and have like very strong, there's not often a very strong expression of like social justice ideals and equality and all that. But there's like some things are happening, and I feel that maybe this, especially for like major productions, like I know mostly the Marvel Cinematic Universe because that's what I've been studying, but I feel like there's almost an intent to avoid cancellation. So, and from any side, so you get some really bland things that try to be both progressive and conservative at the same time. But I feel like there's, like you said, Adi, people kind of notice that some ideas are really not going to, be accepted anymore. And so they have to be careful. So then that's when you get things like a black gay soldier who's invading Afghanistan, or in a movie, for example, that kind of stuff. So it's like, is it progress? You're not really sure, but I feel like there's things happening. And I think like for 2023, the year is going to be quite chaotic. I feel like with Twitter is, I think, just going to continue being chaotic for quite a while. And with the movies, the games, and the books that are going to come out in the next year, I think that's going to create a lot of debate and a lot of space for cancellation. That's going to be, hopefully, will after reach a breaking point and then only get better from here, I hope.
Well, I will also express some hope, but I do think the chaos and the pessimism are very well founded as ideas for what might be coming in the United States and probably in a lot of other countries around the world. But I do hope you all, both of you all here in the panel and those who will be watching, have a great new year, have a great solar new year, and then have a great lunar new year, and that every day your journey becomes easier, even if it's, a minuscule amount. So I want to thank you all for being here, and at the very least, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Welcome.